Hello, my name is Zelig Riyanto, and in essence, my thesis is about the comparison of America and Japan. This idea originally came about when I was thinking of how I was raised in an Asian household and noticed the differences between how I interacted with my parents versus the way my friends interacted with theirs. Ultimately, this was the driving factor for what I wanted to do with my thesis. At ACA, we talk so much about universal truths and virtues which ought to be followed by all people. However, I noticed that a difference in culture often led to a difference in emphasized values. So with my thesis, I wanted to investigate how it is that different cultures have come to highlight different virtues. Originally, I wanted to compare Eastern and Western civilization as a whole, but came to find out that there's no unifying force which unites all of Asia as there is in the Western world. So instead, I decided to focus my thesis on two countries, Japan and America. In order to gain a better understanding of Japanese society, I read Takeo Doi's The Anatomy of Dependence and Ruth Benedict's Chrysanthemum and the Sword. In both of these texts, they emphasize the importance of fulfilling the social obligation in order that they remain in the good favor of other people. In doing so, they prioritize social obligations before the individual so that these relationships remain stable, that they don't become one-sided. In other words, there's a discipline in how one ought to view relationships, a formal discipline. And on the American side, I looked at Machiavelli, Emerson, and de Tocqueville. All three of these men highlight the idea of liberty and how liberty plays an integral part within the idea of individualism, the idea that the self comes before the society. It is often very difficult to make blanket statements on entire nations, entire cultures. So instead of doing that, I decided to take these dispositions and focus them into the realm of a fictional story, one Japanese and one American. The Japanese story being Kokoro and the American story being the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Both of these stories highlight a friend-mentor relationship. In Kokoro, it's between the narrator and someone whom he brands as sensei, and in Huckleberry Finn, it's Huck and Jim. In Kokoro, the formalities of a relationship that come with being in a relationship are emphasized, which imply the importance of discipline within such relationships. The narrator has to choose between his family duties as his father starts to die, and between his own personal desires as he's fresh out of college and looking for a job. He chooses to go back to be with his father, and Sensei also makes some difficult choices when he chooses his own personal desires over his social obligations, which at the end of the book show how that choice was detrimental both to his own relationship and to his relationship with the narrator. And on the other hand, the same social obligations which are praised in Japanese society are the ones that Huck Finn has to break in order to help Jim escape. Being still in a racist society, Huck has to break those social obligations in order to help Jim be free, and ultimately he finds a way to live which transcends the sort of standard way of living at the time. So the difference that lies between these two stories are the different elements which are emphasized in a relationship. In Japan, or in the Japanese sort of story, it's discipline within the relationship, and within the American sense, it's the freedom in the relationship. And though my thesis revolves around noting the differences between two cultures, I would like to make clear that the Tao that C.S. Lewis mentions is something that I do believe in, that there is a universal code that binds us all together. But what differs between us is not the actual values. That's not to say the Japanese don't value freedom or the Americans don't value discipline, but it's the ordering of these values. Which one comes first? Which one is emphasized more? So yes, thank you.